Standing in the kitchen, I sipped my coffee, watching her move around with that familiar air of casual indifference. She held her green smoothie like it was a prop in some well-rehearsed play, completely unaware, or perhaps uncaring, of how her words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was doing. That smirk of hers, perfected over years of practice, was a weapon. Part sarcasm, part dominance, and all disregard for how it might land. My hands were still damp from rinsing dishes when I finally looked up at her. The silence between us stretched just long enough to make her glance over, amused. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked lightly, as though this entire exchange was nothing more than a flirty game. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned toward the fridge, where her meticulously color-coded calendar clung to the surface like a manifesto of control. Monday, spin class. Tuesday, wine with Maya. Friday, 2 words scrawled in bold red ink: our night. I yanked it down without hesitation, folded it neatly in half, and dropped it into the trash can beneath the counter. Then I met her gaze and said, "You want Friday? Earn Monday first." For a moment she blinked at me as if I'd spoken in another language. And right then, I understood. She didn't see me. Not really. Not as a husband. Not as a man. Not even as a person. To her, I was an accessory, a placeholder occupying space until something better came along. A background character in the story she was scripting for someone else. Something had shifted, but it wasn't just her tone or the way she kept her phone face down on the table. It ran deeper, like she'd already checked out of our marriage and simply forgotten to tell me. I didn't confront her, not yet, but I started paying attention. The second toothbrush tucked into her gym bag, the mysterious 11:42 p.m. texts marked only with an M. The way she dressed up for trips to the grocery store but wore sweatpants during our dinners together. So I did what any emotionally starved, desperate man would do when suspicion creeps in but hope lingers. I smiled through dinner, washed the dishes, and quietly began gathering evidence. One accidental glance at her phone, left carelessly on the couch. One screenshot. One call to Maya, who, by the way, hadn't shared wine with her in months. The day after I tossed her precious calendar, something changed, but not in the way I'd hoped. There was no guilt, no apology. Instead, Trina started performing. She cooked dinner, real dinner, not her usual avocado everything nonsense. Chicken piccata, side salad, wine, candles. She even wore the old red top I once complimented, back when she cared whether I noticed such things. But it all felt off, like she was ticking boxes from some magazine article titled "How to Distract Your Husband from Suspecting an Affair." And me? I played along. I smiled, complimented the food, pretended everything was fine. But deep down, I knew exactly what this was: damage control. Later that night, while she feigned sleep beside me, I slipped out of bed and headed to the kitchen. I sat at the kitchen table, opened the voice memo app on my phone, and replayed a clip I had unintentionally recorded earlier that day. It was 43 seconds long, a short but revealing snippet. My phone had been left on the table while I folded laundry, and somehow it started recording by itself. Whether it was an accident or something else entirely, I couldn't say. In the background of the recording, you could hear me humming absent-mindedly, followed by footsteps, hers, and then her voice. Soft but sharp, clearly on the phone. "No, he doesn't suspect anything," she said. "He's just been moody lately. Thinks I've been distant. Whatever. He's sensitive. Always has been." A pause. Then laughter. "No, I'm not canceling." "You think I'd skip Friday for him?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. So it wasn't just paranoia. She really did have plans for Friday, and they didn't include me.
I stared at my phone screen, feeling as if it had betrayed me too. No tears came, no outbursts either. I simply sat there, overwhelmed by a suffocating wave of humiliation. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. The next morning, I did something completely unexpected, even for myself. I made her breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, the works. When she walked into the kitchen, I greeted her with a smile and told her I was taking Friday off work so we could spend the whole day together. Her reaction was priceless. She froze mid-bite, eyes widening for half a second before she forced a laugh. "That's sweet," she said.
Spontaneous, you. Spontaneous? I thought bitterly. Hardly. I was setting a trap. Unbeknownst to her, I had already prepared. Earlier in the week, I planted a spare phone in her car's center console, its recording app ready to capture whatever might unfold. Revenge wasn't my goal. What I wanted was clarity, undeniable, raw truth. Because Friday, I wasn't staying home. I intended to follow her wherever she went. Friday arrived, the day she'd marked for herself. I told her I had a client meeting downtown, and she barely reacted. "I'm going to the spa," she said casually, "and maybe meeting up with my sister afterward." She packed a small bag, light, almost insignificant, and styled her hair down the way she always did when trying to impress someone who wasn't me. I kissed her cheek as she headed out the door, but she barely leaned in. Then she left, walking away as though I were invisible. 10 minutes later, I grabbed my keys, got into the second car, and began tailing her. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I'd never done anything like this before. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that she truly was heading to the spa, that I'd end up sitting in a parking lot while she sent me selfies with cucumbers on her eyes. But deep down, I knew better. She drove across town and pulled into a motel, one of those places where rooms open directly onto the parking lot. I watched as she knocked on door 207, which swung open instantly. A man appeared, tall, shaved head, early 30s, grinning confidently. He pulled her inside without hesitation, as if this were routine, as if it weren't their first time. I sat in my car, engine idling, my chest tight with anger and disbelief. I could have driven away. I could have screamed, cried, or done something reckless. Instead, I parked, waited, and activated the recording app on the hidden phone. 20 minutes later, audio began streaming through my Bluetooth earpiece. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of our relationship. It was a mistake to listen, but I couldn't stop myself. Her laugh, so genuine, so free, cut through me. It wasn't the polite chuckle she reserved for me anymore. It was the kind of laugh that used to belong to us, back when I still mattered. Then came the words that made my blood run cold. "You don't have to worry," she said to him. "He won't leave. He thinks I'm still dealing with stuff." No name, just he, as if I were nothing more than a vague inconvenience in her life, a shadow. I stayed until she left, then followed her, not out of anger, but curiosity. I needed to see where this version of her went after lying to me. She didn't visit her sisters or cry alone in her car like someone wrestling with guilt. No, she went shopping, grabbed coffee, and even posed for a selfie with her dog in the backyard. When she returned home, she hummed softly while making dinner, as though nothing was wrong. That night, I didn't confront her. Instead, I took action, quietly, deliberately. I fished her calendar out of the trash, grabbed a red Sharpie, and wrote 2 words on next Friday's date: "Your turn." The next morning, she noticed immediately. Her brow arched slightly as she glanced at me over her coffee mug. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked. I shrugged, pretending indifference, scrolling through emails like the message was meaningless. She laughed lightly, dismissing it as some playful quirk of mine. But it wasn't flirtation. It was a countdown. Something shifted inside me that day. Not rage, not sadness, but clarity. I realized I'd been clinging to something irreparably broken. I was tired of being an afterthought, penciled into her schedule only to be erased whenever it suited her. If I was going to walk away, I wouldn't let her control the narrative. I wanted the truth exposed, raw and undeniable, the way it had blindsided me. So I began gathering evidence. First, I reached out to her sister, the one she claimed to meet for wine every other week. Casually, I joked about their girls' nights. There was a pause, long enough to make my stomach churn. "Actually," her sister said, "we haven't done that in a while. She's always busy these days. Why?" I didn't answer, just thanked her and hung up. Next, I called our bank. Playing dumb, I inquired about unfamiliar charges. What I discovered chilled me. Trina had opened a second credit card 3 months ago under her maiden name. I requested the statements. Motel stays, gas station receipts from across town, 1 spa appointment. At least that part seemed legitimate. That evening she came home late. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I placed a manila folder on her side of the bed. Inside were copies of the receipts, a screenshot of her message to Nick, not Zach, I'd misjudged the snake, and a photo of motel room 207. She found it when she changed into her pajamas. For a moment she froze, the folder trembling in her hands. She stared at me as if I were a stranger. "What is this?" she asked, her voice breaking. For the first time in months, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. "Your turn," I replied, and left the bedroom. That night, I stayed in the guest room, locking the door and putting on headphones. Not out of fear, but because I didn't want to hear the lies forming in her throat. The next morning, she acted as though nothing had happened. She made breakfast and casually talked about the weather. Not a single word about the folder. Yet I could sense it, the panic simmering beneath her surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. But she wasn't going to admit anything, not yet. She thought I'd crumble like I always did. Except this time, I wasn't backing down. That afternoon, I scheduled something she'd never expect. Her Friday had been reserved for deceit. Mine was now reserved for truth, and I was bringing witnesses. It felt surreal watching someone lie to your face while you carried the truth in your pocket. That week, she doubled down. Trina became oddly affectionate, like a trapped animal trying to inch its way out of a snare without looking suspicious. She packed my lunch for the first time in years, wore perfume at breakfast, called me babe, a term that now made my skin crawl. She even suggested planning something special for Friday. I nodded and said, "Great idea." Truthfully, I'd already mapped it all out, down to the minute. On Thursday, I texted her sister again, telling her I was organizing a surprise date night for Trina and needed her help. She agreed to babysit our dog, something she rarely did unless coerced. I also messaged Trina's coworker, a guy named Elliot, the one she used to complain about incessantly. My instincts told me he was involved. He responded with just 5 words, "Don't drag me into this." Bingo. That night, I compiled everything: screenshots, messages, hotel bookings, voice transcriptions from the hidden phone, and a still image from a cheap motel camera obtained through a mutual friend who worked in security. It all went into one tidy envelope labeled Trina's Date Night. Sleep eluded me that night, but not because of sadness or revenge. I wasn't planning to scream or humiliate her. No, I intended to make her confront what she had built behind my back, brick by brick. Friday evening, I told her to dress up nicely, explaining we had dinner reservations. She looked surprised but pleased, as if the puppet strings were pulling her along once more. She wore that same red top, the one she believed would weaken me. I simply smiled, handed her the envelope, and instructed her to read it during the drive. The silence that followed was suffocating. She opened it, flipping through the pages. Her breathing shifted. She laughed, nervously, dryly, then muttered, "This is insane." But when she reached the screenshot of her own text to Elliot, "He won't leave. He needs me more than I need him," her hand began trembling. I pulled into the restaurant parking lot. Inside, the place was already half full. Dim lighting bathed the room, warm tones filled the air, and soft music played in the background. The atmosphere was calm, yet charged. No dramatic outbursts, no thrown drinks, just a quiet intensity as I led Trina into the room where 3 people were already seated at the table. Her sister, my brother, and Elliot sat silently, their expressions ranging from discomfort to outright dread. Trina stopped abruptly in the doorway, her eyes wide with disbelief. Without saying a word, I gestured toward the table. "You're not serious," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Oh," I replied softly, "I'm deadly serious." She hesitated, then moved forward on autopilot, sitting across from her sister. My brother remained silent, while Elliot looked like he wished he could vanish entirely. I took my seat last, placing an envelope flat on the table. Then I spoke one sentence that carried more weight than anything I'd ever said during our marriage. "Let's all talk about the truth you've been juggling." The moment hung heavy in the air. Trina flinched as though the table itself had bitten her, frozen in shock for what felt like an eternity. The server, who had been approaching with menus, paused mid-step and quietly retreated, sensing the palpable tension. I didn't need raised voices or accusations. I had the truth, laid bare in black ink and undeniable evidence right in front of us. Her sister broke the silence first. "Is this about the hotel receipts?" Her tone was gentle but laced with judgment. Trina stared at her, stunned. "You knew?" she asked, betrayal evident in her voice. "Ironic," I interjected dryly, "considering you served me a steady diet of betrayal for months." Her sister nodded slowly. "Curtis told me last week. I didn't want to believe it, but—" She trailed off, glancing at the documents on the table. I turned to Elliot, whose discomfort was almost tangible. "Ever wonder what it feels like to be the guy your coworker laughs about while sneaking off to motel rooms?" He didn't respond, focusing instead on the glass of water in front of him, as if searching for answers within its reflection. But this wasn't about shaming him or making her feel guilt. It was about reclaiming my voice. For too long, I'd been erased, rewritten in her narratives until I barely recognized myself. This time, I wanted the real me in the room. Trina cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she began, her gaze darting everywhere except toward me. "It just happened." That line, the classic excuse, as if motel bookings, fake wine nights, and secret text chains materialized out of thin air. As if I hadn't spent months feeling lonelier in our marriage than I ever had as a single man. "You said I wouldn't leave," I reminded her. "You thought I needed you more than you needed me." "I was angry," she shot back, suddenly defensive. "You were distant. You stopped trying. You always looked tired, like you didn't even want me anymore." I leaned back in my chair, meeting her gaze steadily. I was tired of chasing someone who wasn't there, tired of being Plan B while you executed Plan A in 30-minute motel windows. She glanced at her sister, seeking sympathy, but found none. Instead, her sister gave her a long, slow blink. "You could have just told him," she murmured. "You could have ended it before you wrecked it." The words landed with precision, cutting through the tension. There was nothing left to say after that. The truth had spoken for itself. My brother, who had remained silent throughout the entire conversation, suddenly pushed his chair back. "I think we've heard enough," he said firmly, glancing at me. "You good?" I nodded, surprising even myself. For the first time in what felt like forever, I actually was okay. Trina sat across from me, frozen in her perfectly applied makeup, her styled hair, and that impeccably chosen dress designed to impress whoever she thought she'd be meeting later. But as she sat there, it was clear she wasn't leaving the table with any semblance of control. She was leaving with silence. I stood up, leaving the envelope on the table, and said simply, "Consider this dinner your goodbye." Then I walked out of the restaurant without looking back. But I didn't go home after that. I didn't head anywhere specific, really. Instead, I drove to the lake, parked in the shadows, and sat in the dark. That's when the weight of everything finally hit me. You'd think I'd feel triumphant, like I'd just delivered the ultimate blow. The reality was far different. I felt hollow, as though I'd escaped a burning house clutching nothing but ashes. Everything I'd built, fought for, clung to, it was all gone. And she hadn't even tried to stop me. I stayed by the lake until nearly midnight. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. No porch light greeted me, no apology waiting at the door. Part of me expected her to be gone, honestly. But when I opened the front door, her purse was still there, along with her shoes and the faint trace of her perfume lingering in the air. She was upstairs, lights off, bedroom door closed. Not a word passed between us. The next morning, I sent an email to my boss requesting a week off. I needed space, not just physically, but emotionally, to figure out what life looked like now. What does a person do when the partner they once dreamed of growing old with becomes someone they can barely stand to sit across from? Walking through the house felt surreal, like wandering through a museum filled with counterfeit memories. Every framed photo seemed staged, every decorative pillow nothing more than a prop. She had choreographed our life like a performance, and I'd been the unwitting audience member, applauding each act. By the third day, she finally broke. I returned from a walk to find her seated at the dining table, eyes swollen, the envelope open in front of her. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she whispered hoarsely. "Do what?" "Expose me like that. Make me look like a monster." I stared at her long and hard. "I didn't make you look like anything. You just weren't prepared for me to hold up the mirror." She stood abruptly, her voice trembling. "You humiliated me." "No, Trina," I replied calmly. "You did that to yourself. I just stopped covering for you." That's when the tears came, real ones this time, not the carefully manufactured kind. Her mascara ran, smudging her face. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe she finally understood. The regret, the guilt, the consequences of her actions, it might have sunk in. But then she spoke again, revealing the truth behind it all. "I just wanted to feel wanted again." It wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about her needs, her validation, her boredom. And I was merely the background noise she muted whenever something shinier caught her attention. So I did the last thing she expected. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue or fight. Instead, I handed her an envelope of my own. Inside was a detailed list of every shared account, meticulously divided. Passwords changed, access revoked, and a letter from my lawyer confirming the next steps. There was no dramatic confrontation, no explosive finale.
Just the quiet acceptance of two lives unraveling, untangling themselves from one another. In that moment, I realized something profound. Sometimes closure doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with silence and the courage to walk away. The moment she saw the papers, her reaction was immediate. "You're actually divorcing me?" she said, collapsing into the chair as though all strength had left her body. "I'm finally respecting myself," I replied. Her words came sharp and biting. "You won't survive without me." That's when a small smile crossed my face, not out of cruelty, but because her statement revealed everything. Even in this crumbling moment, she believed I needed her more than she ever needed me. "No," I said calmly, turning toward the door.
I just finally stopped surviving with you. Later, sitting alone at the cabin I'd rented 3 hours outside of town, those words echoed in my mind. No Wi-Fi, no distractions, just silence and space to think. The clarity hit me like fresh air after years of suffocation. For so long, I'd tiptoed around relationships, molding myself into whatever version would make someone else happy. But now there was only me. And strangely, it didn't feel empty. It felt clean. I journaled every day during that time, pouring thoughts onto pages instead of replaying them endlessly in my head. Simple meals became rituals. Sleep no longer brought nightmares. My phone stayed silent, untouched by desperate texts or calls seeking explanations. There were none left to give. I already knew the truth. Painful as it was, it set me free. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from Trina. A handwritten note filled with admissions, regrets, blame, guilt, even denial. 5 pages detailing how much she missed me, how the affair wasn't about love but attention, how she never thought I'd leave. She ended it with an open invitation. "If you ever decide to come back, I'll be waiting." I folded the letter once, placed it in a drawer, and closed it shut. No reply. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't want to go back. Revenge held no appeal. Validation meant nothing anymore. All I wanted was peace, and somehow, against all odds, I found it. Today, life looks different. Smaller apartment, remote work, weekly therapy sessions. I joined a support group for people recovering from emotional betrayal. Turns out, I'm not alone. Far from it. We share stories, yes, but more importantly, we share growth. No more bending over backward to prove my worth. No more chasing scraps of affection late at night. I've rebuilt myself from the inside out. And here's the surprising part. I'm not bitter, not angry, just awake. To anyone who has felt like they must earn love, let me say this: you don't. If someone dangles affection like a reward, it isn't love, it's control. You deserve better. I did too. Healing doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's simply choosing to walk away quietly, firmly, and without looking back. It's realizing that survival doesn't mean enduring, it means thriving. And thrive I have.